My name is Marian Carter, and I remember the night my world tilted as clearly as if it happened yesterday. We were sitting at a long mahogany table in one of Chicago's finest Italian restaurants, the kind of place where chandeliers glowed low and waiters moved like dancers. My son Marcus had his hand resting proudly over the delicate fingers of his fiancée, a young woman named Lucia Romano. Everyone was laughing at some story Marcus told from his college days, the table alive with joy. And then it happened. Lucia leaned toward her mother, speaking in rapid Italian, assuming no one else at the table could understand. She called me a vecchia mucca bruta, an ugly old cow. Her tone was sharp, dismissive, laced with the kind of cruelty only someone confident in their disguise dares to use. She didn't stop there. She whispered of her plan, her golden ticket, to marry Marcus for a green card, then strip him of his wealth and company in a quiet divorce. Her mother smirked. Her father nodded, and they thought they had delivered their lines in perfect secrecy. But what they didn't know was that I had once lived in Rome with my late husband, that Italian had become the private language of our love. Every syllable slid into my ears with brutal clarity. They believed they were mocking me, but what they were really doing was arming me. I smiled, passed the breadbasket across the table, and said nothing. Inside, though, I felt the sharp snap of something breaking. A fuse, a line of patience, maybe even the last trace of innocence in how I saw this young woman. That was the night my quiet life as a retired literature professor became something else. That was the night I became both mother and hunter. Because if there is one truth I have carried as a black woman raising a son in this world, it is this: no one protects your child like you do. And I swore, in that restaurant thick with wine and lies, that I would protect mine. My son, Marcus Carter, is 34 years old, and if you ask me, he has always carried the kind of ambition that could light up an entire block on the South Side. He was the boy who built computers from scraps when other kids were still playing ball in the street. The young man who worked 2 jobs to fund his first app. And now he's the CEO of a company investors whisper about, with both envy and respect. He has my late husband's smile, the same easy charm that could disarm a room, but he also has my stubborn streak. Marcus doesn't just dream, he executes. And fast. That's why, when he called me one gray Chicago afternoon to say he'd asked a woman to marry him, I knew I was supposed to clap my hands and shout for joy, but instead, something inside me stalled, like a record skipping on the turntable. Her name was Lucia Romano, a 27-year-old from Naples. Marcus had met her on a business trip to Milan, and according to him, it was lightning at first sight. She was radiant, he said, with eyes the color of deep ocean water, and a laugh that seemed to belong in a movie. "Mom, she just gets me," he told me. His face lit up like I hadn't seen in years. He talked about her intelligence, her sophistication, the way she made him feel like he wasn't just successful, but seen. I listened, nodding, while inside I was doing the math. 6 months. 6 months from strangers, to soulmates, to wedding bells. I thought of my own marriage, how long it took to build trust, to lay brick upon brick of a foundation that could weather storms. Love doesn't grow overnight. It grows in the long conversations, the quiet sacrifices, the slow weaving of 2 lives into one fabric. What Marcus had sounded less like a quilt and more like a costume, hastily stitched together. Still, as a mother, I smiled. I congratulated him. Because that's what you do when your child believes he's found happiness. But deep down, I knew, just as sure as I know the weight of my own heartbeat, that some storms were gathering on the horizon. I wanted to be happy for him. Lord knows I did. Every mother dreams of the day her child calls with news that he's found the one, that his heart has finally found a home. But as Marcus talked about Lucia, painting her like some vision out of a love story, I felt a knot tighten inside me. It was the kind of knot you don't loosen with kind words or champagne. It was instinct, the raw, unshakable instinct of a mother. Maybe it comes from raising a black son in America, where every step forward feels like you're protecting him from traps you know the world has set. Maybe it comes from being widowed too young, from carrying the weight of both mother and father until Marcus could stand on his own. Whatever the reason, I've learned to listen to the small voice inside, the one that whispers warnings when everything looks too perfect. Lucia's story sounded like a fairy tale, and fairy tales are lovely, until you remember they often hide wolves behind velvet cloaks. She was young, beautiful, worldly. She wanted to leave Italy and build a new life in America with my son. On paper, it was a dream. But to me, it read like a transaction. 6 months was not love. 6 months was a season. And I couldn't shake the thought that maybe Marcus wasn't her forever. Maybe he was her opportunity. Still, I smiled when he asked if I'd welcome her. Of course, I said, my voice calm even as my heart beat a warning drum. I agreed to meet her parents, to play my role in the romance he believed was destiny. Out loud, I was the supportive mother. Inside, I was already bracing myself. Because when you've lived long enough, you learn. Happiness is sweet, but it's also fragile. And sometimes, the ones who reach for it the fastest are the very ones who intend to break it. The first time I met the Romanos, it wasn't across a dinner table. It was through the cold glow of a laptop screen, the kind of introduction 21st century families make when oceans stand between them. Marcus set it up one Saturday afternoon, grinning from ear to ear like a boy about to show off a prized trophy. When the screen split into squares, there they were, Gianni and Sofia Romano, framed by the soft gold light of what looked like a very carefully staged living room in Naples. Gianni wore a tailored suit that seemed almost too formal for a video call. His salt and pepper hair combed back like an aging movie star. Sofia sat perfectly poised beside him, elegant in a silk blouse, her smile gracious but rehearsed. And then, of course, there was Lucia. She was as striking as Marcus had described, dark hair falling over her shoulders, those deep blue eyes that seemed to look right through the screen. Her English carried that lilting Italian melody, each word polished as if she'd been practicing. She complimented Marcus endlessly, then turned her focus on me. "Signora Carter," she said, with the kind of warmth that felt just a little too smooth. "Marcus has told me you are a woman of great strength and wisdom. It will be my honor to know you." It all should have landed sweet. And maybe for Marcus, it did. But for me, it rang like a script. Every line memorized, every gesture too perfect. As the conversation flowed, I listened more to what they didn't say than what they did. Gianni spoke of their family legacy, vineyards in southern Italy, and an ancestral villa that had been passed down for generations. But when he tried to anchor the story in history, he stumbled, confusing one century's ruler with another. My ears pricked at the inconsistency. A man truly proud of his lineage doesn't get his own family's past twisted. Sophia smiled often, but rarely spoke. Her silence more telling than her words. She had the expression of someone holding cards close to her chest, letting others do the selling. And Lucia, she was the centerpiece. She leaned forward, eyes soft, her voice threading charm into every syllable. To Marcus, it was magic. To me, it was performance. When the call ended, Marcus was glowing. "See, Mom? Aren't they amazing?" he asked. I kissed my teeth lightly, the way my grandmother used to when something didn't sit right. I told him they were lovely. What I didn't tell him was that loveliness can be painted on just as easily as lipstick. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't watching a family introduction. I was watching an audition. The night we met in person, Marcus insisted on taking us all to La Scala, one of Chicago's most celebrated Italian restaurants. The kind of place with velvet chairs, crisp white tablecloths, and wine bottles older than some of the waiters. For me, it wasn't just about the food. It was about memory. My late husband had loved Italian cuisine, and walking into that room, with the smell of garlic and butter in the air, felt like stepping into an old photograph. We were 5 at the table, Marcus at the head, beaming like the happiest man alive, Lucia by his side, her hand never straying far from his, Gianni and Sophia across from me, offering polite smiles as if they were royalty gracing us with their presence. I told myself to breathe, to be gracious, to keep my eyes wide open. The evening began smoothly enough. Marcus told stories from his college days, making everyone laugh, his voice carrying that boyish pride I'd missed. The Romanos nodded along, sipping their wine, offering compliments that sounded as polished as sales pitches. I tried to focus on my meal, cutting into veal parmesan that tasted far blander than I remembered. And then, like a sudden crack in the glass, everything changed. Marcus had turned his attention to Gianni, explaining something about his company's recent valuation. He was animated, proud, caught up in his own success. That's when Lucia leaned ever so slightly toward her mother. Their shoulders almost touched, their heads bent just enough to carve a private corner in a public room. And in a low, rolling Italian, she spoke words she thought were safe. Quella vecchia mucca brutta non capisce niente. That ugly old cow doesn't understand a thing. The words sliced through me sharper than any knife on that table. But she wasn't finished. She went on, her voice calm, measured, cruel. Marcus è il mio biglietto d'oro. Lo sposerò. Avrò la carta verde. E quando sarà il momento giusto, prenderò metà della sua azienda. Marcus is my golden ticket. I'll marry him, get the green card, and when the time is right, I'll take half of his company. Her mother gave the faintest smirk. Her father's eyes flickered with quiet approval. They thought they were whispering into a locked room. But what they didn't know was that Italian was not foreign to me. It was the language my husband and I once shared in Rome, our secret music. To them, it was a code. To me, it was confession. I lifted my glass, took a slow sip of water, and forced myself to smile. My face had to stay calm, unreadable. If Marcus caught even a flicker of my rage, everything would unravel too soon. So I passed the bread basket down the table, murmured something polite, and let the mask settle over me. But inside, a storm had been set loose. That wasn't just insult. It was war. And as I sat there, Nodding along to the rest of the dinner, I realized something important. They believed they had fooled me. They believed they had already won. What they didn't know was that I had just heard their battle plan in my own language, and I was already preparing mine. I kept my smile steady through the rest of that dinner, but every muscle in my body felt like it was carved from stone. I laughed at Marcus's jokes. I nodded when Gianni rambled about vineyards. I even complimented Sophia on her earrings, though my throat burned with every word. To anyone looking on, I was just another proud mother, charmed by the idea of gaining a new family. But inside, something had shifted. There's a moment in every parent's life when you realize your role isn't just to raise your child. It's to protect them long after they think they no longer need protecting. That moment, for me, came under the golden light of La Scala's chandeliers, with wine glasses clinking all around us. I wasn't the woman Lucia thought I was. I wasn't clueless. I wasn't fragile. And I damn sure wasn't going to let my son be dragged into ruin by a woman who saw him as nothing more than a walking ATM. So I swallowed my pride. I played the part. I let the Romanos leave the table with their perfect smiles intact. But as I watched Lucia slip her hand into Marcus's, as though she already owned him, I made a silent vow. I would learn everything there was to know about her. I would peel back every layer of charm, every well-rehearsed smile, until the truth stood naked in the light. And when the time came, I would show Marcus who she really was. I didn't know yet how I would do it. I only knew that patience would be my weapon. Patience and the quiet fire of a mother's love. By the time the valley pulled our cars around, my plan had already begun to take shape. Not in details, but in resolve. I kissed Marcus goodnight, hugged Lucia politely, and watched them walk away arm in arm. To Marcus, it was the perfect evening. To me, it was the first chapter of a war, and as I slid into the back seat of my cab, Chicago lights flashing across the window, I whispered to myself, "They think I'm blind, but I see everything." 2 mornings after that dinner, I found myself sitting on the 24th floor of a glass tower downtown, staring out at the sweep of Chicago's skyline. The city looked so strong from up there. Steel, glass, motion, but inside me, I felt nothing but tremors. The man who finally walked into the office was someone I hadn't seen in years. Clarence Williams. We'd gone to college together back when afros were big, and protest songs filled the air. Clarence had gone on to become one of the top immigration attorneys in the Midwest, the kind of man who knew the system better than the people who wrote the laws. He didn't hug me or waste time with small talk. He just closed the door, poured me a glass of water, and said in that deep baritone of his, "Marian, you sounded like you were calling from a funeral. Tell me what's going on." So I did. I laid it out piece by piece, my voice steady, though my stomach was knotted. I told him about the video calls, about the polished lines from Gianni and Sophia. I told him about La Scala, about the words I'd overheard in Italian, the insult, the plan, the smug certainty that Marcus was nothing more than a payday waiting to happen. Clarence didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He just leaned back in his chair, hands steepled, eyes sharp behind his glasses. Finally, he said the words I had been both dreading and needing to hear. "Marian, that's marriage fraud." Hearing it named out loud was like a punch and a relief all at once. He stood and paced, the way lawyers do when they're already sketching out a courtroom in their head. "Your word won't be enough," he told me. Marcus is in love. He's not going to believe you if all you bring him is suspicion. And if you confront Lucia now, she'll just cry, spin a story, make you the villain. That girl's an actress. You need proof, Marian. Documents, texts, money trails. We're not talking about instinct anymore. We're talking about evidence so hard it can't be denied. I sat there, feeling the full weight of the task settle on my shoulders. For a moment, I thought of Marcus as a little boy, running across a playground with his shoelaces untied, not knowing how close he was to falling. And here I was again, chasing after him, ready to tie the knots before he broke something he couldn't fix. Clarence came back to his desk, his voice calm but firm. I'll handle the legal side. But you've got the harder job. You've got to play along. Be the doting mother. Smile in their faces. Act like you don't suspect a thing. You're our Trojan horse, Marian. You stay close. Keep them comfortable. While I dig. Can you do that? I took a long breath. My heart said no. My pride said no. But my love for my son said yes. So I nodded. I can do it. For Marcus, I'll do whatever it takes. Clarence didn't waste time. By the end of the week, he had boots on the ground in Italy, private investigators in Naples and Milan, people who knew how to pull records out of dusty government offices and pry secrets from neighbors who'd been watching for years. The first report came through encrypted email, the kind that needed a password I had to write down twice, just to be sure I'd remember it. When I opened the file, I felt like I was peeling back the silk curtains the Romanos had so carefully hung around themselves. And behind those curtains, the picture was rotten. Gianni Romano, the proud patriarch in his tailored suit, was up to his ears in gambling debts. Not just friendly poker nights, but serious money owed to men whose smiles never reached their eyes. There were records of late payments, threats, even a lien placed on what little property he still claimed. Sophia, the elegant mother with her chic blouses, had run a boutique in Naples, on credit. The shop had gone under 18 months earlier, leaving a trail of unpaid suppliers and lawsuits stacked like unpaid bills on her desk. She was still being chased by creditors, and the so-called ancestral villa they bragged about. It wasn't a family estate at all. It was mortgaged to the ceiling, foreclosure papers already moving through the system. The house they'd painted as a legacy of old money was nothing more than a sinking ship, and they were bailing water with broken buckets. The deeper the investigators dug, the uglier it got. Bank accounts overdrawn, credit cards maxed out. Every financial trail pointed in the same direction. Desperation. I sat there at my kitchen table in Chicago, reading line after line of this report, and felt something twist in my chest. Not pity. No, that wasn't it. If they'd been honest about their struggles, if Lucia had come to Marcus with the truth and a genuine heart, maybe I could have opened mine. But this wasn't honesty. This was a con, a family performance where my son was cast as the prize. I closed my laptop and pressed my palms flat against the wood table, the same table where Marcus had done his homework as a boy, where we'd eaten fried chicken on Friday nights, where his father once read the newspaper while sipping coffee. And I thought, they're not just after his money, they're after his future, his name, everything we built as a family. Later that night, Clarence called. His voice was calm, clinical, the way a doctor tells you the test results you already know in your gut. Marian, they're drowning, and your son, Looks like their lifeboat. I thanked him, even as my throat closed tight, because now the suspicion I'd carried had a body, a name, a dollar amount. It wasn't just a mother's instinct anymore. It was evidence. And evidence, Clarence reminded me, was the only thing that could cut through Marcus's fog of love. If the Romanos were drowning, then Lucia was the one swimming hardest, reaching for my son, as if he were a life raft made of gold. The weeks after La Scala felt like watching a play, where every scene had been rehearsed 1,000 times, and Marcus was the audience of one, soaking it all in. She called him amore mio in public, her voice dripping with sweetness, and the way Marcus's face lit up. You'd think he was the first man in history to be loved in Italian. She cooked for him too, or at least claimed she did. I caught her once bringing takeout pasta to his apartment, sliding it into ceramic dishes, and letting Marcus believe she'd been over the stove all afternoon. He laughed, kissed her cheek, told her she was perfect. What she was perfect at, I realized, was performance. One Saturday, they invited me to join them for brunch at a trendy spot in River North. Between the avocado toast and the bottomless mimosas, Marcus brought up something practical, something I'd quietly pushed him to consider, a prenuptial agreement. He tried to make it sound casual, just a thought. With the company growing the way it is, he said, it might be smart to have everything clear, just for business reasons. I watched Lucia's expression closely, and Lord, she didn't even blink. She placed her hand over his, tilted her head, and gave him a look so soft it could have melted steel. Marcus, she whispered, her accent wrapping around his name like silk. If you need a contract to love me, then I have already failed you. My heart is not something to sign away. It is yours, without conditions. It was a master class in manipulation. Marcus, my brilliant, ambitious son, sat there like he'd been baptized in holy water, his shoulders relaxed, his smile spread wide, and he kissed her hand like she was some saint who had descended into his life. And me? I wanted to slam my glass down and shout, "That's exactly what a con artist says when she wants to keep her hands free to grab everything you own." But I didn't. I forced a smile, stirred my coffee, and played the role Clarence told me I had to play. The supportive, doting mother who believed every sugary word. As we left the restaurant, Marcus slipped his arm around her waist, whispering something I couldn't hear. She glanced back at me with the faintest smirk, a glimmer that said she knew exactly what game she was playing, and that she thought she was winning. That night, lying awake in my bed, I replayed the scene over and over. I thought about the pasta, the hand-holding, the tears that never quite spilled but always threatened. It wasn't just love she was selling. It was a full-blown illusion, and Marcus, he was buying every last piece of it. The email came late on a Wednesday night, just as I was settling into bed with a cup of chamomile tea. The subject line was simple: Romano File, Germany. My hands trembled a little as I opened it, because by then I already knew what Clarence's investigators were capable of uncovering. And there it was, in black and white. Lucia had done this before. 2 years earlier, in Berlin, she'd been engaged to a wealthy German investment banker named Klaus Meinhardt. The story was almost identical to Marcus's. A whirlwind romance, expensive dinners, quick promises of forever. The engagement had moved so fast that even Klaus's family raised their eyebrows, but the red flags didn't come from them. They came from the paperwork. When the prenuptial agreement landed on the table, Lucia's lawyers, yes, she had lawyers, tried to gut it clause by clause. Every line that protected Klaus's assets was challenged. Every safeguard against divorce settlements was picked apart. Klaus, suspicious, hired his own investigator. Within weeks, he had discovered enough inconsistencies in Lucia's background to call the whole thing off. The engagement ended abruptly. The wedding deposits vanished, and Lucia slipped out of Germany before the scandal could fully stain her name. Reading it, I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't just the audacity of it all, it was the pattern. She wasn't some naive girl swept away by Marcus's charm. She was a professional, a woman who had already tried this game once, and was bold enough to try again. This time on my son. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my quiet Chicago home. 1,000 thoughts rushed through me. Had Marcus ever wondered why someone as young, glamorous, and worldly as Lucia would tie herself to him so quickly? Did he ever question why every moment with her seemed like it had been plucked from a romance film? Of course not. He was in love. He was drowning in it. I thought back to the night at La Scala, the smug tilt of her smile when she whispered in Italian, confident no one could understand. Now, paired with this file from Germany, it was all clear. This wasn't an accident. It was a career. I wanted to pick up the phone right then and there, call Marcus, shout the truth until it pierced the fog she'd wrapped around him. But Clarence's words echoed in my mind. Don't move too soon. You only get one shot, Marian. Make it count. So I didn't call. I sat there in the dark, clutching the evidence with one hand and my son's future with the other. And in that silence, one truth became sharper than ever. Lucia Romano wasn't just dangerous. She was practiced. And practiced liars are the hardest ones to bring down. The second file from Clarence's team landed on my desk like a hammer. This one wasn't about financial ledgers or old business failures. This was personal. It was a transcript of text messages, lifted legally from a former friend of Lucia's back in Naples, a woman named Chiara, who'd once been close enough to share secrets before their friendship went sour. I scrolled through the Italian words, my eyes running over them like blades. And even though the investigators had provided English translations, I didn't need them. Every insult, every cruel joke, every mocking plan leapt off the screen in a language I understood all too well. The fish is on the hook. That was the first message. Another, he's so naive. It's almost sad. He believes everything I tell him. Then came the line that made my blood turn to ice. His mother is boring. An old cow who pretends to matter, but who cares? She'll be gone soon enough. The real prize is Marcus, the Bancomat Americano, the American ATM. I had to set my laptop down. My hands were shaking too badly to keep reading. That wasn't just disrespect. It was dehumanization. My son, my baby boy who had grown into a man, was nothing more to her than a machine she could punch numbers into and watch money flow out. And me? I wasn't even a person in her eyes. Just an obstacle, a tired old woman to be stepped over, but I forced myself to keep going. Because there it was, in black and white, the truth Marcus could never dismiss as just a mother's suspicion. Once I get the green card, I'll wait. 2 years, maybe 3. Then divorce. Half the company, half the money. We'll be rich. No more debts. She had typed it casually, like she was talking about ordering coffee, not about dismantling my son's life. And her mother, Sophia, had replied in another thread, "Be patient, Lucia. The reward will be worth it." By the time I reached the last message, "Say goodbye to Italy. We're moving to America for good. Marcus doesn't know what's coming." My anger had burned into something colder, heavier. Rage is fire. This was ice. I closed the laptop, sat back in my chair, and stared out the window at the city lights flickering against the Chicago night. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably holding her hand, laughing, dreaming of a future she had already written in invisible ink. And in that moment, I understood what Clarence meant when he said I'd have to be patient, strategic. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It wasn't about whether I liked Lucia or not. This was about survival, my son's survival. So I whispered to the night, a promise more than a prayer. "You think he's an ATM? You think I'm irrelevant? Watch me. Watch how a mother fights when you threaten her child." The night I finished reading those messages, I knew one thing for certain. This couldn't be handled in whispers or private arguments. If I confronted Lucia in the quiet of my living room, she would twist it. If I went to Marcus with nothing but my word, he'd brush it off as overprotective paranoia. No, the truth had to be unveiled in a way that not even love's blindfold could cover. That's when the idea came to me. The Chicago Cultural Center, with its grand Tiffany dome and marble staircases, wasn't just a building. It was history carved into stone, a place where the city had celebrated art, music, and milestones for over a century. I'd been there dozens of times for literary events and community gatherings. But now, I saw it as something else. A courtroom without benches, a stage without actors. If the Romanos wanted a performance, I would give them one. Only this time, the script would belong to me. I called Marcus the next morning, my voice light, rehearsed, like a mother finally surrendering her doubts. "Son," I said, "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time I stop being stubborn and truly welcome Lucia into our family. What better way than with an engagement party? My gift to you both." The joy in his voice nearly broke me. "Mom, are you serious? At the Cultural Center? That's huge." "Yes," I told him softly. "Something memorable. Something that honors this union." What I didn't say was that the guest list wouldn't just be friends and family. It would be witnesses, my closest allies, Marcus's business partners, the people whose opinions mattered most in his world, people who couldn't be brushed aside once the curtain fell and the truth was laid bare. I met with the event coordinator, a woman I'd known for years named Denise, and together we mapped out every detail. Golden light to make the room warm and safe. A jazz trio in the corner, playing smooth standards Marcus's father would have loved. Tables lined with crystal glasses and roses. The air filled with the scent of celebration. Everything crafted to lull Lucia into the comfort of victory. And then, at the precise moment, the trap would spring. I imagined it over and over. The guests raising their glasses, Lucia basking in the glow, Marcus beaming with pride. And then, my voice shifting to Italian, the words of a fable flowing like silk across the room, a story about a bird and an eagle, a parable that would mirror her lies, screens lighting up behind me, revealing the documents, the texts, the evidence she thought no one would ever see. It would be devastating, public, final. Did I feel cruel Perhaps. But cruelty, I reminded myself, is when you let someone you love walk straight into a pit without warning them. This wasn't cruelty. This was protection, sharpened into strategy. As I signed the event contract, pen scratching across the paper, I felt the weight of what was coming. I wasn't just planning a party. I was preparing a reckoning. The night of the engagement party, Chicago was dressed in its finest. The cultural center shimmered like a cathedral of glass and light, its marble staircases polished to a mirror shine. As I stepped through the arched doorway, the sound of a jazz trio drifted through the air, smooth and velvety, like a promise that tonight was going to be unforgettable. And unforgettable it would be. The grand hall had been transformed into something almost cinematic, white roses spilling out of tall crystal vases, golden light spilling across polished floors, champagne bubbling in slender flutes that caught the sparkle of the chandeliers. Guests murmured in little clusters, their laughter blending with the music. Every face glowed with expectation. This wasn't just a party. It was a statement. Marcus looked radiant. I hadn't seen him that happy since he was a boy, tearing open Christmas gifts at dawn. He moved through the room with a hand at the small of Lucia's back, introducing her to board members, investors, family friends, who'd known him since he wore braces. His pride was unmistakable. He was showing her off, as though he had discovered the rarest gem and wanted the world to admire its shine. And Lucia, she was flawless. Her emerald dress shimmered with each step, hugging her like it had been sewn by hand for this very night. Her smile never faltered, not too wide, not too small, just enough to look effortlessly gracious. She floated from one conversation to another, sprinkling charm like confetti. When she laughed, it was soft and melodic, drawing people in. When she listened, she tilted her head just so, as though every word spoken was a secret meant only for her. I watched her closely. Every gesture was calculated, every line rehearsed. She kissed cheeks, clasped hands, and told stories in her lilting accent. The guests adored her. To them, she was the perfect fiancée, the picture of elegance, warmth, and devotion. But I knew better. Behind that smile was a woman who had once called me vecchia mucca bruta, an ugly old cow. Behind those honeyed words was the same voice that had texted her friend, calling my son a bancomat Americano. I stood near the back of the hall, sipping sparkling water, letting the noise of celebration wash over me. My heart pounded, not with nerves, but with something heavier, a sense of inevitability. The cultural center's golden light wasn't just illuminating her beauty. It was also preparing to spotlight her lies. Marcus caught my eye from across the room. His face softened, full of gratitude, as though he believed this entire night was my way of finally embracing Lucia. I forced a smile back at him. It broke me inside, knowing what was about to come. But I reminded myself, better one night of heartbreak than a lifetime of ruin. As the waiters began to serve the dessert course and the music swelled, I set my glass down and looked around the room. The stage was ready, the actors were in place, and the final act of my play was about to begin. I tapped my spoon gently against the rim of my glass. The soft chime rang out like a bell, calling the room to order. Conversations tapered off. The jazz trio lowered their volume, and all eyes turned toward me. Marcus beamed, his expression a mixture of pride and relief, as though this was the moment he'd been waiting for. His mother standing tall, welcoming his fiancée before the world. Lucia turned to me with that flawless smile, her green dress glittering in the golden light, her hand resting lightly on my son's arm. I rose slowly, my glass of water in hand, my heart beating in deliberate rhythm. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice calm but strong enough to carry across the grand hall. "Thank you all for being here tonight, to celebrate what should be one of the happiest moments in a parent's life, the engagement of their child." A gentle murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I allowed myself a warm smile, looking first at Marcus. My son has grown into a man I am proud of every single day. Ambitious, kind, generous. And for the past few months, I've seen a happiness in him that I hadn't seen in years. That happiness has a name, and her name is Lucia. Polite applause followed. Lucia's smile widened, her chin tilting just slightly higher, basking in the praise. I continued softer now. Tonight is about joy, about family, about hope for the future. I paused, letting the words sink in. Then I glanced around the room, lowering my glass. But it is also about truth, and sometimes truth is best revealed through story. The shift was subtle, but I felt the air tighten. Marcus blinked, curious. Lucia adjusted her posture, the corners of her smile stiffening just a fraction. I switched languages. My words flowed in Italian, smooth, deliberate, echoing off the marble walls like the verses of an old poem. "There was once a little songbird," I began, "with feathers as bright as jewels, and a voice sweet as honey. She lived in a land of fading fortunes, where the seeds bore no fruit, and the wells ran dry. She dreamed of flying to a new world, a land of high, safe nests, and endless food. But she did not want to make the journey alone." The guests shifted uneasily, many glancing toward the projection screen, now glowing quietly behind me. The English subtitles rolled in sync with my words. "So, she found a young eagle, strong, noble, and full of promise. She sang to him the sweetest songs, told him he was magnificent, promised him a future together. The eagle, blinded by love and dazzled by her beauty, opened his nest, offered his territory, everything he had built." Lucia's smile froze. Marcus frowned, looking from me to her, his confusion deepening with each word. "But the songbird," I continued, my voice steady as stone, "had no intention of staying. Her plan was to take the eagle's nest, his food, his sky, and then leave him to fall." I let the silence stretch, the Italian syllables hanging in the air like a judgment. The subtitles glowed behind me, undeniable, unavoidable. Finally, I looked directly at Lucia. Her eyes were wide now, her chest rising and falling as though she couldn't quite catch her breath. I switched back to English. This may sound like just a fable, but sometimes, my friends, stories carry more truth than we realize. The room was utterly still. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector, and in that suspended silence, I could feel the cracks forming in the perfect mask Lucia had worn so effortlessly. The story was finished. The next chapter, the evidence, was waiting. The pause after my fable stretched long enough that I could feel the tension prickling against my skin. Guests looked around, murmurs rising like a low tide. Marcus's brow was furrowed, his eyes searching my face, waiting for me to laugh, to tell them it was just a metaphor. But I didn't. Instead, a figure rose from the back of the room. Clarence Williams. impeccable in a dark suit, his expression calm, grave. He walked toward the front, his presence commanding without a word. When he reached me, he turned to the audience and spoke with the weight of a man who had spent decades arguing before judges. "Good evening," he began, his voice carrying over the hall. "My name is Clarence Williams. I am an attorney specializing in U.S. immigration law. Over the past several weeks, at the request of Marian Johnson, my firm has conducted a full investigation into the Romano family and their intentions surrounding this marriage." A hush fell over the crowd. Behind us, the projector screen flickered to life. No longer the soft words of a parable. Now it was numbers, charts, official stamps. "The Romanos," Clarence continued, "are not a family of wealth and legacy. They are, in fact, drowning in debt. Gianni Romano has over 200,000 euros in outstanding gambling debts, many owed to individuals under criminal investigation. Sofia Romano's boutique collapsed in bankruptcy, leaving creditors unpaid across Naples. And the so-called family villa, mortgaged to the brink of foreclosure." Gasps rippled through the audience. I saw investors lean forward, jaws tightening, whispers passing sharp as knives. But Clarence wasn't done. His voice hardened. "Lucia Romano has also attempted this before. 2 years ago, in Germany, she became engaged to a wealthy banker, only to be exposed when she sought to manipulate a prenuptial agreement in her favor. The engagement was terminated, and she fled the country. On the screen, a photo of Klaus Meinhardt appeared beside a copy of the broken engagement announcement. The guests shifted uneasily, eyes snapping back to Lucia. She was pale now, her hands gripping Marcus's arm, though he had gone stiff beneath her touch. "And finally," Clarence said, his voice dropping lower, deliberate, "we uncovered communications in which Lucia and her mother revealed their true intentions. Not love, not family, but fraud." The next slide appeared, a series of text messages in Italian, with English translations beside them. "The fish is on the hook. He's so naive. It's almost sad. His mother is just an old cow, irrelevant." And then the dagger. "Marcus is my bancomat Americano. Once I have the green card, I'll wait 2 years, then divorce. Half the company will be mine." The hall went silent. No one breathed. Even the jazz trio had fallen still, their instruments hanging in stunned silence. Marcus's face drained of all color. His mouth opened, but no words came. He turned slowly toward Lucia, disbelief etched across his features. She shook her head violently, tears springing into her eyes as if on cue. "No, Marcus. Amore, it's not true. It's lies. All lies." But Clarence's voice cut through her protests like a blade. "These messages have been verified and submitted to federal authorities. The Romano family is now under investigation for conspiracy to commit marriage fraud. Their visas are flagged for revocation. Their attempt to exploit Marcus Johnson for financial and immigration gain ends tonight." For a moment, no one moved, and then the room erupted, not in applause, but in sharp, horrified murmurs. Friends of mine shook their heads in disgust. Investors whispered furiously, already recalculating trust. Lucia sat frozen, mascara streaking her cheeks, her mask shattered. Gianni stared at the floor, hollow, while Sofia buried her face in her hands. But Marcus, my son, looked only at me. His eyes were broken glass, shimmering with betrayal. And in that look, I saw everything. The boy I'd raised, the man he'd become, and the fragile dream that had just collapsed at his feet. The party was over, the trial was complete, and the verdict was undeniable. The weeks that followed the engagement party felt quieter than I expected. Not empty, just quieter. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavy. The Romanos were gone within days. Clarence called me the Monday after, his voice even, professional. Their visas have been revoked. They're on a plane back to Naples as we speak. Immigration and financial authorities will handle the rest. Just like that, the people who had almost torn my son's life apart vanished like a bad dream. But Marcus remained, and he was broken. For weeks, he moved through life like a shadow of himself. He went to work, but the spark that used to light his eyes when he talked about his company was gone. He answered friends' calls, but his laughter sounded thin, strained. At night, he came to my house, sat at the kitchen table where he'd once done his homework as a boy, and stared at his coffee until it went cold. The hardest part wasn't his anger. It was his silence. He didn't curse Lucia. He didn't rail against the betrayal. He just sat in that heavy quiet, his heart still trying to process how someone he had loved so deeply had seen him as nothing more than a paycheck, and all I could do was sit with him. Some nights, neither of us said a word. I'd cook fried chicken, the way his father used to like it, and he'd eat 2 bites before pushing the plate away. I wanted so badly to fix it, to tell him it would be all right. But some wounds aren't meant to be covered with bandages. They have to breathe, to hurt, before they can heal. Slowly, painfully slowly, he began to come back. 3 months later, on a cold morning in December, he stood with me in front of his father's grave on the south side. He laid a single white rose against the headstone, his hand trembling only slightly. "She would have known," he whispered. "Mom, she would have seen through her right away." "Yes," I said softly. "Your father always said love can make us blind, but truth has a way of cutting through." He nodded, his jaw tight, and for the first time in months, I saw a different light in his eyes. Not the naive glow of a man in love, but something steadier, stronger. Back home, I returned to my study, a room lined with books and old photographs, a place that had always been my refuge. I looked at the photo of my late husband on the desk, his smile captured in a frozen moment of joy. And I realized something. This battle hadn't been about revenge. It had been about protection, about love in its fiercest form. I hadn't just saved Marcus from a marriage built on lies. I'd saved him from a lifetime of betrayal. And though my heart still ached from the wreckage of it all, I knew this. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is not in saying yes, but in saying no. Not in giving, but in defending. Not in being silent, but in speaking the truth, even when it shatters the dream your child so desperately clings to. The silence in our lives now wasn't emptiness. It was peace. Hard-earned, fragile, but real. In the quiet months that followed, I found myself thinking less about Lucia and more about what the whole ordeal had taught me. You don't go through something like that without walking away changed. The first lesson was simple, but not easy. You have to listen, not just to words spoken at the dinner table, but to the silences between them. Not just to the rehearsed stories people tell you, but to the slips, the small cracks where truth leaks out. That night at La Scala, when Lucia whispered in Italian, I realized how much of life depends on listening with your whole being. Too often, we listen only to reply, but real listening, the kind that saves lives, means hearing what isn't meant for your ears. The second lesson was about patience. Everything in me had wanted to scream the truth to Marcus the moment I heard her say Bancomat Americano. I wanted to shake him, to drag him out of the fog of love and force him to see. But if I had done that, he wouldn't have believed me. He would have defended her. He might have turned against me. Patience, Clarence reminded me, was my sharpest weapon. And he was right. Sometimes the hardest part of loving someone is waiting long enough for them to be ready to face the truth themselves. And then there was the final lesson. Truth is the most powerful weapon we have. Not anger, not threats, not arguments shouted in frustration. Truth. Cold, undeniable, documented truth. The evidence we laid out at the cultural center was like sunlight pouring into a dark room. It burned away the illusions, no matter how beautifully they had been spun. Lies may dazzle for a while, but they cannot stand against the weight of truth. I think about that a lot, especially when I look at Marcus now. He's not the same man he was before Lucia. He's quieter, more thoughtful, a little less trusting, but he's also stronger. He knows now that not every hand held out to you is meant to lift you up. Some are meant to pull you under. And me? I've come to accept that being a mother doesn't end when your child grows up, or when they move out, or even when they say, I don't need you anymore. It never ends. It just changes. Sometimes love is soft. Chicken soup on a sick day, a hug at the airport. And sometimes love is hard. Standing in front of a room full of people, tearing down the fantasy your child clings to, because you know what waits on the other side is worse. If I could go back, would I do it all again? Every painful moment, every sleepless night, every tear I wiped from Marcus's face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Because in the end, protecting him wasn't just my duty as a mother, it was my privilege. And if there's one truth I would pass on to anyone willing to listen, it's this. Love without truth is just illusion, but love armed with truth, that's unbreakable. When I look back on everything that happened, I realize this story was never just about my son, or about Lucia, or even about me. It was about something bigger, about how easy it is to be blinded by what we want to believe, and how dangerous it can be when we mistake charm for character. The lesson is simple, but it carries weight. Love must be built on truth, or it will collapse under its own lies. No matter how sweet the words, no matter how perfect the smile, if the foundation is false, the house will fall. And when it does, the cost is always heartbreak. I fought for my son not because I wanted to control his life, but because I wanted to protect the life he had yet to live. Sometimes, being a parent means standing back and letting your child fall. But other times, it means stepping forward, even if it makes you the villain in their eyes for a while, because you know what's waiting ahead will destroy them. That is what love looks like when it's at its strongest. Not soft, not easy, but unshakable. And now I want to turn the question to you. Have you ever had to tell someone you love a hard truth they didn't want to hear? If this story touched you, if you believe wisdom and truth are the greatest weapons against deceit, then do me a favor. Hit that like. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where love and truth prevail over lies. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Because sometimes, one story can save a life.